The Doors of Perception in Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. Picture this: the world you navigate every single day, your bedroom walls, the glow of your screen, the faces you know by heart, is just the tiniest sliver of what's actually out there. Here's the wild part. Your brain, that magnificent 3-pound universe sitting between your ears, isn't actually trying to show you everything. In fact, it's doing the exact opposite. Think of it as the world's most sophisticated bouncer standing guard at the door of your consciousness. Its job? Keep most of reality out. Your brain acts like a pressure valve, turning down the infinite, overwhelming chaos of the universe into a manageable little stream of information. Just enough to help you grab your morning coffee, dodge traffic, and survive another day. But here's the question that'll keep you up at night. What if you could crank that valve wide open, just for a few hours? What would pour through? What would you witness if the filters fell away and you could see reality without the training wheels? Infinite, raw, and utterly unfiltered. This question haunted one of the 20th century's most brilliant minds, Aldous Huxley. You probably know him as the guy who wrote Brave New World, that unsettling vision of a future where humanity gets lulled into submission by pleasure and technology. But Huxley was way more than a novelist with a knack for dark prophecy. He was a fearless mental explorer, born into a dynasty of brainiacs. His grandfather was a celebrated scientist, his brother a world-famous biologist, and young Aldous inherited their insatiable hunger for understanding. After mapping out humanity's possible futures, Huxley turned his telescope inward, toward the vast, uncharted wilderness of human consciousness. He became fascinated by mystics, visionaries, and artists, people throughout history who claimed they'd peeked behind the curtain of everyday reality. How did they manage it? And more importantly, what on earth did they see back there? So one spring morning in 1953, this respected English intellectual did something extraordinary. He volunteered himself as a guinea pig. On a bright May day, he swallowed 0.4 grams of mescaline, the active component of the peyote cactus, and settled in to see what would happen. The book that emerged from this experiment, The Doors of Perception, along with its companion piece, Heaven and Hell, hit the cultural landscape like a thunderbolt. These weren't just trip reports from some literary eccentric. They were rigorous investigations into the nature of reality itself, the machinery of the brain, and the untapped potential lurking in every human mind. They shaped an entire generation's thinking and even inspired Jim Morrison to name his band The Doors. Today we're going to walk through those doors with Huxley. We're going to explore what he discovered on the other side. And I promise you this, by the time we're done, you'll never look at a simple flower, a piece of furniture, or even the wrinkles in your own clothing quite the same way again. You'll understand why we're all living in a kind of self-imposed exile from a much grander reality, and you might just find the keys to unlock your own doors of perception. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Every single one of us is fundamentally alone. Sure, we share our lives, we talk, we think we're connecting, but the actual raw experience of being you? That's yours alone. As Huxley describes it, we're each an island universe. We can send smoke signals to other islands, we can try to describe our beaches and mountains, but nobody can actually set foot on your island, and you can't visit theirs. This isolation becomes even more pronounced when we're talking about people whose islands look radically different from ours. How can someone who's never lost their grip on reality truly understand madness? How can a person with average musical ability experience the world the way Mozart did? How can we visit the realms that visionaries like William Blake called home, a man who saw angels as clearly as he saw his own front door. This question drove Huxley to distraction. He was, by his own admission, a terrible visualizer. When he read poetry, however beautiful, it didn't paint vivid pictures in his mind. His inner landscape felt gray and limited. He'd devoured the writings of mystics and visionaries, but their experiences felt as foreign to him as describing color to someone born blind. He wondered if there might be a key, perhaps a chemical key, that could unlock the door to these other dimensions of experience. He believed mescaline might be that key. He expected fireworks. He anticipated that after taking the drug, he'd close his eyes and watch a spectacular inner light show. Geometric patterns exploding in impossible colors, magical architecture, symbolic dramas playing out on the stage of his mind. But that's not remotely what happened. An hour and a half after swallowing the pill, Huxley was sitting calmly in his study. Behind his closed eyelids, pretty boring, actually. A few golden glimmers, some grayish shapes. Nothing to write home about. The real revolution was happening with his eyes wide open, in the ordinary world around him. His gaze drifted to a small glass vase on his table containing 3 flowers, a pink rose, a magenta carnation, and a pale purple iris. That morning at breakfast, he'd noticed them and thought the colors clashed a bit. But now he wasn't just looking at flowers. He was witnessing what Adam must have seen on the very first morning of creation. He was watching, moment by miraculous moment, the naked fact of existence itself. The flowers were radiating their own inner light, practically vibrating with significance. He could see in them both their fleeting temporariness and their eternal nature, a perpetual dying that was somehow also pure, being with a capital B. These weren't just pretty plants. They were doorways to the divine source of all existence. They seemed to breathe, not in and out, but in a continuous flow from beauty to even greater beauty, from meaning to ever deeper meaning. Words like grace and transfiguration floated through his mind. For the first time, he genuinely understood what ancient spiritual traditions meant by phrases like being, awareness, bliss. He wasn't just intellectually grasping it. He was seeing it, living it. He remembered a famous Zen koan. A student asks the master, "What is the divine nature of Buddha?" The master replies, seemingly at random, "The hedge at the bottom of the garden." Before, this had seemed like cryptic nonsense to Huxley. Now it was blindingly obvious. Of course, the divine nature of reality was the hedge at the bottom of the garden. It was also these flowers. It was literally anything he chose to really truly look at. He turned his attention to the books lining his study walls. They too began to glow with living light. Red books blazing like rubies, green ones luminous as emeralds, others shimmering like jade, agate, and topaz. The colors were so intense, so inherently meaningful, the books seemed ready to leap off the shelves, demanding his attention. The researcher observing him asked about spatial relationships. Huxley found the question oddly difficult to answer. Sure, the walls of the room didn't quite seem to meet at right angles anymore, but who cared? Space itself had stopped mattering. Normally, our eyes are constantly asking practical questions. Where is it? How far? What's it near? But in this state, his mind was perceiving reality in completely different terms. Location was irrelevant. What mattered was intensity of existence and depth of meaning. The books glowed with life, some brighter than others, and where they sat on the shelf was completely beside the point. Just as space lost its grip on him, time became almost meaningless. When asked what he felt about time, all Huxley could manage was, "There seems to be plenty of it." He was living in an indefinite duration, a perpetual now made up of one constantly changing revelation. From the books, his attention moved to the furniture, a table, a wicker chair, a desk. But he wasn't seeing them as a person who sits in chairs and works at desks. He was seeing them as pure form, an intricate dance of lines and shapes, like a still life by Braque or Juan Gris, without depth or photographic realism. But even this aesthetic appreciation gave way to what he could only call a, quote, sacramental vision of reality. He was back in the territory of the flowers, where everything radiated an inner light and carried infinite significance. He found himself staring at the legs of a chair, mesmerized. How miraculous their roundness, how supernatural their polished smoothness. He spent what might have been minutes or centuries not just looking at those bamboo legs, but somehow being them, or rather, being himself in them. Or, more precisely, being his not-self in the not-self of the chair. The I, the ego he normally identified as Aldous Huxley, was simply not in the equation. This profound experience led him to a revolutionary conclusion about how minds actually work. He found himself agreeing with philosopher C.D. Broad, who had suggested that the brain's primary function isn't to produce consciousness, but to eliminate most of it. Let that sink in for a moment. It's a radical idea. The theory goes like this. Each of us is potentially connected to what Broad called mind at large. At any given moment, we're theoretically capable of perceiving everything that's happening everywhere in the universe. But to make biological survival possible, this overwhelming tsunami of information has to be squeezed through the reducing valve of our brain and nervous system. What trickles out the other end is just enough consciousness to help us stay alive on this particular planet. Language, our greatest tool, is built on this reduced awareness. It helps us navigate our simplified world, but it also imprisons us. It confirms our belief that this trickle is all there is. We start mistaking our words for actual things, our concepts for raw reality. What we casually call the world is just the universe of our reduced awareness, frozen in place by language. Most people spend their entire lives knowing only what makes it through that reducing valve. But some people seem to be born with a kind of bypass. These are the artists, the visionaries, the mystics. Others can acquire temporary bypasses through spiritual practices, hypnosis, or chemicals. Huxley realized that mescaline was temporarily throwing a wrench in his brain's reducing valve. How? The drug inhibits certain enzymes, which reduces the amount of glucose available to the brain. When the brain is slightly starved like this, the ego weakens. It can't be bothered with its usual survival-oriented obsessions. It loses interest in tracking space and time. And as this happens, mind at large begins seeping past the no longer watertight valve. All sorts of biologically useless but spiritually profound things start happening. Some people discover worlds of visionary beauty. Others, like Huxley, are shown the infinite value and glory of simple existence. In the deepest stage of this egolessness, there's an obscure knowledge that everything is in everything, that the all is actually present in each individual thing. This is as close as a finite mind can come to perceiving everything happening everywhere in the universe. This theory explained the incredible intensification of color he was experiencing. Our highly developed color vision is actually a biological luxury. For sheer survival, we don't need to perceive the millions of shades we're capable of seeing. Mescaline cranks all colors to maximum intensity, making the user aware of countless subtle shades they're normally blind to. It seems that for mind at large, color is vastly more important than size, position, or dimension. Later that day, as the drug's effects began to soften, Huxley was taken for a drive that included a stop at what was billed as the world's biggest drugstore. There, he found a display of art books. He picked up a volume on Van Gogh, which happened to fall open to the painting The Chair. Huxley was stunned. The chair Van Gogh had painted was obviously the same in essence as the chair he'd been staring at in his study. It was a portrait of pure being itself. But even Van Gogh's genius wasn't quite enough. The painting, however powerful, was still just a symbol pointing at the truth. The reality Huxley had experienced was the raw, unfiltered thing itself. The painting was merely a signpost. This sparked a provocative insight about art in general. Art, he thought, might actually be just for beginners. It's for those of us who have to settle for symbols rather than the reality they point toward, for the recipe rather than the actual meal. Someone whose perception has been genuinely transformed can see the infinite in every ordinary object, making the artistic quality of religious paintings completely irrelevant. He then looked down at his own crossed legs. The folds in his gray flannel trousers became a labyrinth of endlessly significant complexity. The texture of the fabric was rich, deep, mysteriously sumptuous. He suddenly understood why artists throughout history have been obsessed with painting drapery. When you paint cloth folds, you're painting non-representational forms. These wrinkles and shadows are living hieroglyphs that stand for the unfathomable mystery of pure existence. The artist, Huxley realized, is someone who's naturally wired to see what the rest of us only glimpse under the influence of mescaline. A little knowledge from mind at large naturally leaks past the reducing valve of their brain and ego. As he gazed at his trousers, he kept repeating to himself, "This is how one ought to see. This is how things really are." But this blissful state came with a deeply troubling problem. If you always saw the world like this, you'd never want to do anything else. Just looking, just being the divine not-self of a flower or a chair or a piece of cloth, that would be completely sufficient. But what about other people? What about human relationships? This question began to trouble him deeply. How could he reconcile this timeless bliss of pure seeing with the temporal demands of doing and feeling? He realized that during his experience, he'd been deliberately avoiding eye contact with his wife and the researcher in the room with him. They belonged to the world of individual selves, of time, of moral judgments and practical concerns, the world of ego and overvalued words from which mescaline had temporarily liberated him. This participation in the glory of pure being left no room for the messy, necessary concerns of human existence, especially those involving other people. He'd become a not-self, perceiving and merging with the not-self of things around him. To this newborn consciousness, the behavior and thoughts of his ordinary self and of other selves seemed enormously beside the point. This feeling crystallized when someone showed him a reproduction of a self-portrait by Cézanne. The head seemed to pop off the page into 3 dimensions, like a little goblin man staring out at him. Huxley burst out laughing. "What pretensions?" he kept saying. "Who on earth does he think he is?" The question wasn't really aimed at Cézanne. It was aimed at all of humanity. We're all guilty of overacting the starring role in our favorite fiction, ourselves. He found relief by looking back at the folds in his trousers. These are the sort of things one ought to look at, he thought. Things without pretensions, satisfied to simply be themselves. This led him to reflect on the difference between artists like Vermeer and Rembrandt. Vermeer, he felt, was the supreme painter of human still lives. He painted people at rest, minds quiet, bodies motionless, manifesting their divine, essential, not self. But this was only a partial opening of perception's doors. Rembrandt, on the other hand, represented a more complete art, one that could embrace the messy, active, suffering world of being human. Huxley was facing the ancient debate between action and contemplation, between the way of Martha and the way of Mary. In the biblical story, Mary sits absorbed in spiritual presence while Martha bustles around doing necessary work. Mescaline, he realized, opens the way of Mary but slams the door on Martha's way. It provides access to contemplation that's fundamentally incompatible with action, or even the will to act. The drug could pose the problem dramatically, but it couldn't solve it. The complete solution, he believed, lies with the bodhisattva of Buddhist tradition, the enlightened being who, out of compassion, chooses to remain in the suffering world to help others, seeing that everyday contingency and divine reality are actually one and the same. This journey into vast inner landscapes wasn't always blissful. There were moments of genuine terror. While looking at a garden chair, its canvas striped with intense indigo shadows and blazing blue light, he suddenly felt a wave of panic. It was the fear of being overwhelmed, of disintegrating under a pressure of reality too intense for a mind accustomed to the cozy world of symbols. It was the fear that schizophrenics must live with constantly, unable to shut off an experience of reality too overwhelming to bear. This brings us to the second part of Huxley's exploration, which he titled Heaven and Hell. Visionary experience, he explains, isn't always beautiful. It can be absolutely terrifying. Hell exists alongside heaven. Like heaven, the visionary hell has supernatural light and significance. But the light becomes what Milton called darkness visible, an intense, merciless glare. And the significance is intrinsically horrifying. For the negative visionary, the infinite revealed in finite objects isn't a manifestation of divine presence, but of what Huxley calls the system, a vast cosmic mechanism of guilt and punishment. What determines whether your journey leads to heaven or hell? Sometimes it's physical. A diseased liver, for instance, can turn the experience infernal, but more often, the cause is psychological. Fear and anger block the way to the heavenly realms and plunge the traveler into hell. This, Huxley argues, is the psychological foundation for the theological doctrine of saving faith. It's not just about being morally upright. A virtuous person filled with anxiety, resentment, or self-satisfaction is more likely to have an infernal experience than a sinner who genuinely repents and makes an act of loving trust in something greater. Huxley then broadens this idea to explore the universal human need for what he calls chemical vacations from the intolerable self and the often ugly, monotonous world. This urge for self-transcendence, he argues, is one of the soul's principal appetites. It's why we have art, religion, festivals, and dance. And it's also why humans have always sought out chemical intoxicants, from alcohol and tobacco to the narcotics and hallucinogens found in plants across the globe. The problem, he notes, is that our most common doors-in-the-wall alcohol and tobacco are devastatingly harmful. They cause immense suffering and death. The solution isn't prohibition, which never works, but opening other, better doors. We need new substances, he proposes, that can provide safe and enlightening escapes without causing more harm than good. Mescaline, he felt, was a step in this direction. It's not perfect. The experience lasts inconveniently long, and a minority have difficult trips, but it points the way forward. Unlike alcohol, it doesn't trigger violence or reckless behavior. The person under its influence quietly minds their own business. And that business is an experience of the most enlightening kind, with no hangover. Huxley concludes his journey not with a simple endorsement of drugs, but with a powerful call for a new kind of education. Our current system, he argues, is almost exclusively verbal. We teach students about words and concepts, but we utterly fail to teach them about the primary facts of their own experience. We produce scientists unaware of nature itself, and humanities, students who know nothing about being human. We honor the verbal arts, but almost completely ignore the nonverbal ones, the arts of being directly aware of the raw facts of existence. The person who comes back through the door in the wall, Huxley writes, will never be quite the same as the person who went out. They'll be wiser but less arrogant, happier but less self-satisfied, humbler in acknowledging their ignorance, yet better equipped to understand the relationship between words and things, between systematic thinking and the unfathomable mystery it tries, forever in vain, to comprehend. The experience didn't turn Huxley into a drug evangelist. Instead, it confirmed his deepest suspicions about the limitations of ordinary perception and deepened his lifelong quest for a fuller understanding of what it means to be human. It was a glimpse into an infinite world, lying just beyond our everyday awareness, waiting for us to find the key and gently push open the door. So what do we actually take away from Aldous Huxley's incredible journey? It's tempting to hear this story and think it's just about a famous writer experimenting with psychedelics in the 1950s. But that completely misses the point. This book isn't really about mescaline at all. It's about reality itself. It's a profound challenge to the biggest assumption we make every single day, that what we see is all there is. Huxley's central concept of the brain as a reducing valve is more relevant today than it's ever been. We live in an age of unprecedented distraction. Our minds are under constant bombardment from notifications, headlines, and endless information streams designed to capture our extremely limited attention. In a sense, our modern world has constructed a second, artificial reducing valve on top of the one our brains already have. We're not just filtering out the infinite reality of mind at large anymore. We're filtering out the quiet, simple reality of our own lives in favor of a digital echo chamber. The most powerful lesson from the doors of perception isn't that we should all seek out chemicals to alter our consciousness. It's that we should cultivate deeper awareness and appreciation for the miracle of naked existence right in front of us. Huxley needed a drug to truly see a flower for the first time. The question his book leaves hanging is this: can we learn to see it without the drug? Can we, through our own effort and attention, pry open that reducing valve even slightly and let more of the world flow in? This brings us to a few practical actions you can take, inspired by Huxley's journey. First, practice the art of just looking. Once a day, for just 2 or 3 minutes, pick something simple and ordinary. A leaf on a tree, a crack in the sidewalk, the grain in a wooden table, even the back of your own hand. Your mission is to look at it, without labeling it, without thinking about its function or even its name. Try to see it as Huxley saw those flowers, as pure patterns of color, light, and texture. Don't analyze it. Just perceive it. Let its sheer isness reveal itself to you. This simple practice can begin weakening the grip of your verbal, analytical mind and open you to the nonverbal reality that's always present. Second, actively seek out what Huxley might call vision-inducing art. Pay attention to what genuinely transports you. Is it music that makes you lose track of where you are? A painting with colors so vibrant they seem to glow from within? A film that shows you the world from a completely fresh perspective, maybe an extreme close-up of an insect, or a time-lapse of stars wheeling across the sky? When you find these things, don't just passively consume them. Engage with them. Ask yourself, why is this moving me? What is it revealing that I don't normally see? This trains your mind to recognize and appreciate experiences beyond the purely practical. Finally, gently question your own reality. Next time you feel bored, stressed, or stuck in routine, pause and remember the concept of the reducing valve. Ask yourself, what might my brain be filtering out right now for efficiency's sake? This isn't about creating paranoia, it's about cultivating wonder. It's a reminder that the world is infinitely stranger, more beautiful, and more mysterious than our everyday consciousness allows us to believe. It's a way of inviting a little bit of mind at large back into your daily life. Ultimately, The Doors of Perception is a powerful reminder that the greatest undiscovered territory isn't in outer space, but within our own minds. Huxley's journey shows us that we're all living on a tiny, well-lit island in the middle of a vast and mysterious ocean of consciousness. We may never fully explore that ocean, but we can, and perhaps should, learn to walk to the shore, look out at the horizon, and acknowledge the infinite that surrounds us. That was a summary of The Doors of Perception and Heaven and Hell by Aldous Huxley. We've covered the core ideas today, but I need to be honest with you. A summary is like looking at a photograph of a magnificent feast. You can see what's on the table, but you can't taste a single bite. The real magic of this book lives in Huxley's own words, in the elegance of his thought, and the stunning clarity of his descriptions. This summary is a map, designed to show you whether this journey is worth taking. If anything we've explored today has sparked your curiosity or resonated with you on a deeper level, I genuinely encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about absorbing information. It's an experience that can fundamentally shift how you perceive the world and your place in it. The link to the book is in the description below. And if you found this journey valuable, please take a moment to support the channel by hitting that like button and subscribing. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another potentially life-changing book here on Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep exploring and growing together.